back. Welcome to Liberty.me Live. This is Free Association. I'm Lucy Steigerwald. I am here with Sheldon Richman, and we are here to have a little talk, as we like to do every other Tuesday. You know me, you know Sheldon. I'm tired of pretending you don't know. You know us. Tired of introducing ourselves every time. Sheldon, do you want to give us a little starting off point, and then we can talk?
Okay, I guess we were going to start with refugees, and then I'm sure that will take us into the larger issue. Of course, there's this big controversy about whether refugees from Iraq and Syria should be allowed in, and Trump and others are engaging in a lot of fear-mongering about how there's no way we could possibly do this because there could be terrorist infiltrators. We don't have any information on people from those countries, especially Syria, and therefore, how can we possibly be crazy enough to take a chance of letting 10,000 people in over the next year, which is what Obama has called for, when that's the case, when we just don't know if we'd be bringing in terrorists or not. So some of us have tried to keep our heads a little cooler and put a little perspective on it. If you look at the refugee program in particular, it really seems to be much ado about nothing in what Trump and others are saying. For one thing, before a refugee even gets here, if a person applies for formal refugee status, there's this 2 or 3 year certification process. So it doesn't seem like, before I say anything more, it doesn't seem like the best route for a terrorist. I mean, you're going to say, oh, good, I'm going to go over to the U.S. and blow something up 2 or 3 years from now while I sit in a UN camp somewhere for refugees. It's just not the way it's going to happen. If you're really afraid about people coming in from outside to commit terrorism on behalf of the Islamic State, it seems to me you're not worried about Syrians with Syrian passports. You'd be worried about Americans who have either and now Islamic sites most appropriate, and never even setting foot outside the country, or somebody who has a European passport. So that the danger is, it seems to be the least of the dangers is someone actually coming from Syria through the refugee program. There is a huge amount of vetting that goes on, first from the UN while the person is in this camp, and then by the U.S. afterwards, which includes face-to-face interviews. And they have statistics. There's an organization that keeps track of this that's pro-refugee, helping refugees, and they say that with 750,000 Syrians who have been worldwide resettled, there's been like 3 possible incidents, and with regard to the U.S., it's people that were planning to go outside of the U.S. to commit some kind of act. So it wasn't even something plotted inside the U.S. It's been an insignificant issue, and yet Trump is really leading the way in whipping up concern. And he's been saying for weeks now, they'll go back, right? If any come in and he becomes president, they're going back. You know how he talks. I'll tell you right now, they're going back. It'll be terrific. They're going back. So he's still saying that, but he's saying in the meantime, he'd want a registry, and now, of course, and I don't need to make this just about Trump, but he's so vocal, and he's saying the most, he's putting I think a lot of the establishment Republican views in its most crystal clear form. He was asked whether he wanted to have all Muslims registered and put it into a database, and he said yes. I mean, I saw that recording, that tape video many times on CNN last weekend, where he said, yes, we need to go beyond databases. Those were his words. We need to go beyond databases. And he talked about closing mosques. He talked about closing down places where people get radicalized, which means closing down a lot of bedrooms, right? Where people are on the internet, kids are on the internet reading this stuff, or so they tell us. Maybe that's not really even happening, but maybe but maybe it is in certain cases. So what are you going to do about that? He promises to close down all this. Anyway, I just chalk this up to the usual hysteria. There's always been hysteria about refugees in the past, and no two cases are ever the same. And I know people have brought up the question of Jewish refugees in the 30s from Nazi Germany, and Jesse Walker did a very good piece on this at Reason, which everyone should go read. And but there was concern that there could be Nazi agents packed among the waves of Jewish refugees coming in, and people were worried about that. And of course, U.S. had terrible immigration laws in those days, worse than now. And Jews got turned away, and there was a ship that was almost in arm's reach of Miami to St. Louis, which had to turn around and go back. And I think a lot of those people end up getting killed, and it's a heartbreaking story. Anyway, I'll stop there. I've probably said enough to provoke comment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways to go from that at least. They have this thing called Godwin's law about referencing Hitler on the internet in an argument, and it's sort of been stretched from its original definition. But for a while, it turned into this aversion to ever referencing the Nazis. But the Nazis are sort of useful because they're the most extreme and horrific, and most people know more about them in terms of just the worst face of statism you could possibly comprehend. So I think the aversion to referencing them is sometimes silly, and I think it's been interesting how many reputable people have been comfortable actually directly referencing the Jews who were turned away in reference to Syria in the last few weeks. People are actually not shy about this. Just a bunch of different outlets have been doing this, and I'm pleased to see that because there's a book called Human Smoke that I've been reading for a while that basically covers the run-up to it goes up until Pearl Harbor. It's actually the early years of the war and even before the war, and that's what I didn't know as much about over the years. And there's so many haunting quotes. So many people who had just enough anti-Semitism that they decided it was better to not bother helping these people. There was this vague sense that helping them might be nice if we get around to it, if we could hash it out. But I mean, there was 20,000 children that were rejected at one point, and there was a bunch of quotes about Bolshevism, like, would come and they would change the demographics of the U.S. There's some stuff that sounds very, very similar, and the only difference that I can see is, with the Jews, there was a campaign to actually exterminate them from the earth, and one can say that is a relatively unique circumstance. But I mean, I don't know. It's just interesting to see that xenophobia, even when people are in the most peril that they're ever going to be, it's such a popular pastime of the U.S. And here it is again.
Yeah. And looking longer term, if you leave people sitting in camps in the position you hear Cruz and others is, well, why don't we stay in the Middle East? Well, that means being in some kind of refugee camp, but those places are notorious for being schools for radicalization.
Oh, yeah, sure.
First of all, confinement tends to do that to people, especially a younger person who feels hopeless and wants to get out and gets mad and then begins to hear perhaps this doctrine from others that are already there who are, of a ISIS mind or mindset or Al-Qaeda mindset. That just spreads that, so you're not doing any good, except I guess you could say, well, at least they're over there. But it seems to me self-defeating, and people are hysterical. And look, you can't ever keep a relatively open society perfectly safe. It's impossible.
Right.
And look, even if you monitored every person. Of course, how do you know the people doing the monitoring aren't reached by radicals and then become radicals? So, right. there's no way out of that. That's why I keep saying that non-interventionism is the best protection.
Yeah.
May not be a guarantee either, but I think it's a better guarantee.
Now, I've had some arguments with people who, they want their non-intervention, but since the intervention has already happened and they see that there are people who are peeved at the U.S. for some substantial reasons, they're concerned about now. And I suppose that is a slightly different avenue. But the reality that you can't ever make it perfectly safe still applies. I mean, it always applies. And it's not a very satisfactory answer for people, is that we may not be able to guarantee, your safety from this fairly obscure threat, but handing over, powers to the government or leaving people to die may not be a very good response to this slight probability.
Yeah, I mean, I think non-interventionists are wrong to imply, and I've heard this said by some, that if all we need to do is declare a Ron-Paulian foreign policy and begin to withdraw American forces, and everything will be okay. And I've always been uncomfortable with that, because there are people who will think they have grievances that need to be addressed, or want vengeance from older offenses in their eyes, and so you can't guarantee that just because we make this announcement and actually begin to implement it, everyone's going to say, okay, it's all right now. We don't need to be mad at Americans because they've apologized and they're going home. That's not the way things tend to work. Somebody still might want to settle the score in their view. I just think we have to talk in terms of relative risks. That's what it's always about, and trade-offs. And it seems to me the best route is first of all, stop creating new enemies. Really show that we mean it. We mean non-interventionism, and that we regret what's been going on. And I don't know what's going to be better than that. I do know that stepping up the war there, whether we do it personally, we meaning the U.S. government does it personally, or just aids a whole bunch of people who are going to be killing innocents. I mean, like in Yemen, for example. That just creates new enemies. And, U.S. government people have been saying that for years, that for every terrorist to kill, you create 10, and droning creates radicals. And
strangely, that's not the intelligence that any hawks want to listen to. They're the ones always saying, my God, we have to listen to our intelligence community, but not when our intelligence community says, boy, blowback exists, and, funding various rebel groups has proved to be fairly ineffectual. And they're like, oh, what? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I have to go fight encryption and things like that. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, they're very selective.
They're very selective. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're very selective in what they choose to believe. It's true. They'll believe some things that the terrorists say, or that the heads of Al Qaeda or those groups say, but not other things.
Right.
So when they say things like they quote Baghdadi saying, "I'll see you in New York," right, when he was released from Camp Bucca. Well, what were they doing to him in Camp Bucca, for one thing? But they believe that. Oh, that's a threat. That's a real threat. He's going to see us in New York. But they don't believe, when they list their reasons for being mad at the U.S., that it's not that we have MTV or prostitution or Times Square or porn shops or whatever the neocon position is on why they hate us. When they say, no, it's because you back corrupt monarchies, you support Israel, you had military bases in the holy places in Saudi Arabia. When they say those are the reasons, that gets dismissed. We don't believe that.
Right.
We only believe that they want to, that they threaten us. But why would they be lying about the reasons?
I've wondered that myself, and I've never heard a good answer to that. And I mean, again, a lot of sort of, shall we say, right-wing people, they'll believe, the domestic blowback that was the Oklahoma City bombing. They'll believe Timothy McVeigh's motivation, which was, of course, anger at Waco and Ruby Ridge. And the moment it's a foreign guy from a foreign place who perhaps follows this foreign religion, all these alien things, the list of grievances, like, they cannot be believed. Or they pull the same old Rudy Giuliani shit where they either actually confuse or pretend to confuse this as saying, my God, you think all those people deserved it. I mean, that's an old one, but they're still using that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I still think, Ron Paul got it right in 2008 when he was debating with Giuliani, and, he got ridiculed by, who was it, Wendell Goler, who was one of the moderators of that debate for Fox. And, Giuliani took umbrage and said, you take that back right now. You take those words back. And yet he was right. And that's still accurate. And we need to keep saying it, even though a lot of people don't want to hear it.
But I mean, back to the whole huge refugee crisis thing right now I would argue that it sounds like a joke if you say that, the Clintons and the Cheneys and the Bushes should be the ones paying to help out these people. But in a even slightly just world, they would be, because, I don't know, everyone who voted for them. No, but what do we do now, though, when this is happening? What is the libertarian, proper thing to do?
Well, the libertarian thing to do with the refugee in the question of refugees, the Niskanen Center, which is in favor of admitting refugees, has been exploring precedents from the not too distant past about private efforts to pay for the resettlement of refugees, and there have been such programs in Canada and the U.S. previously. So they've been trying to find alternatives to it being a U.S. taxpayer matter. I did see a piece by Ron Paul at his institute where he said that we shouldn't admit the refugees because it'll be tax financed. I don't know if you saw that, because he ended up saying something like, if Obama, I really didn't think the tone of this was very good. Even though he scored some points against the people taking Trump's position and Cruz's position, he ends up by saying, look, if Obama wants refugees, well, he's got spare bedrooms, let him keep them at the White House. That's how he ended up. I was disappointed in that.
Well, the Pauls, Ron Paul in particular, this was always one of his weaker points. He was never quite as bad as some people are on this question, but it's never, it's not what I have the fondness for him for. But on the other hand, there's a bit of a problem. I don't want to.
U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that, I'm not one of those people who argues that because the state is illegitimate, everything the state does is just as bad as everything else. I think that's absurd for so many different reasons. But, if we are talking about something that's going to cost people money, in the interim before anarchy-topia, I would rather help out a bunch of Syrians than fund the DEA or do any number of other things the state is currently doing. Yeah. But we do well know that, it's never a question of or with the state, it's a question of this on top of what's already there. But I still can't be broken up about it because the U.S. government broke those countries. And Ron
Paul's article actually said that. He said, which is why I was a little surprised by the change in tone in the piece, because in the beginning he says these people are fleeing the consequences of U.S. foreign policy. So I thought, you're right away to go, Ron. But then he kind of he went off into this fiscal consideration. Look, it's not as if they don't resettle refugees, they're going to give us back our tax money. They're not going to do that.
Right, they're not.
So I'm not sure that really is a great argument, but I would be all for private groups stepping up and defraying the cost.
This is just this is sort of an international version of when on the rare occasions like when a police officer is found guilty. Usually, it tends to be in a civil case, if at all, for killing someone unlawfully. They'll have to pay. Maybe they'll pay out $1 million. They're not paying out that $1 million, of course. So libertarians tend to root for any semblance of justice when someone has been killed in those circumstances. But of course, the cop himself, or even their their chief of police and wherever, they're not the ones paying this. It's always the taxpayers. It's why the game is so impressively rigged that I don't know.
Right, and we don't, and it seems to me we shouldn't that should not lead us to take the position that nothing should be done.
Right.
Because the government's going to have the money anyway. They're not going to lower taxes because, hey, we don't have to pay victims of police brutality anymore, so let's cut taxes. Right. They're not going to. That's not what happens. Right. So we don't end up saving. Unless the victims of police brutality, they've paid taxes, so at least they're getting some of it back. Okay.
Right. That's true. If they're alive, that is.
Yes, they're still alive, or they're okay. So the family the survivors get it.
Yes.
But I think Ron Paul's made a bigger deal of the fiscal aspect of this issue than the others. The ones in the presidential race aren't really talking about the fiscal burden. They're saying we can't let Muslims in. I mean, Cruz wanted a religious test. I don't know if he's still standing by that. Rand Paul's taken a bad position on the refugees, hasn't he? As I understand.
5 minutes after, being a sort of solid echo of his father in that last debate, he comes out being horrible on this topic because he can never be good for more than 5 minutes at a time, I'm afraid.
He hasn't gotten them yet. What is he still showing? What, under 5%?
Yeah.
In various polls. So, what's he got to lose?
Yeah, quite.
Then we should mention Trump. And I think all this ties in because Trump is trying to sow fear, and if you make people afraid, they'll be less likely to welcome refugees. His claim that he saw thousands and thousands of people holding tailgate parties on roofs, in order to celebrate the attack on the Twin Towers. It wasn't clear at first. I thought he said he actually watched it out his window.
Right. Yeah, me too.
But he's like 4 miles away in Midtown. Then he saw it on TV, and what he watched out of his window were people jumping out of the Twin Towers. But CNN showed the map, and his Trump Towers, where his apartment is pretty far from where the World Trade Center was.
I mean, he means the famous. Is it the famous footage of a couple of people? Well, what is he actually? It was nothing that he's talking about was in the thousands of celebrating people, as far as I know.
I don't think there's any video.
In New Jersey.
Well, the various fact checkers at the Washington Post and CNN and other places say there's no news footage of people celebrating. Now, what he may be thinking of, first of all, there were some shots from the Middle East.
Right.
I think maybe even in Gaza and some places. Although Yasser Arafat immediately expressed his condolences and condemned the attacks, and so did Iran. So
that wasn't thousands of people anywhere. There's no footage of thousands of people celebrating 9/11 anywhere, particularly New Jersey.
Right. Now, what he may be thinking of, and then confusing with a lot of other things, is there was a report done by ABC. I think it was ABC. Oh no, sorry, Fox. I think it was Fox about in Jersey calls to the police saying we see a couple of guys standing on a truck watching the burning buildings and dancing, and those guys were stopped by the police. I mean, there's a 911 recording which you can find online. Those guys were stopped, and they were Israelis working for a moving company, and who apparently were watching this from across the river and were seeming to celebrate it. Now, it doesn't mean they had anything to do with it,
right?
Because Netanyahu, after the attacks, said something along the lines that, well, this is a good thing. Now Americans realize how we live. So an Israeli could, in a way, celebrate it, or somebody who's pro-Israeli, celebrate it in this way. I'll put quotes around the word, in the sense that, okay, Americans now will understand and join wholeheartedly in our struggle. That's not quite the same as celebrating. It doesn't mean they pulled it off or did it or any of that sort of thing. But that was credible because there are, like I said, there's a I think there's a police report. There's a 9/11 recording, and people were stopped, and they were quoted saying, "Look, we're Israelis. We're not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem." Well, I don't know why they would say the Palestinians, because Palestinians weren't involved in 9/11, but at any rate, maybe he's kind of vaguely thinking of that and then combining it with the scenes from the Middle East where some people were celebrating, and then twisting it all up and thinking, oh, it was thousands and thousands of people in Jersey City.
You can't just say that.
I don't.
I mean, that's not. You can't just make up facts, as far as I know.
Well,
but
Trump can. So, and Trump, and now we're veering on to Trump, I realize, but Trump's got a pretty nifty thing, which is too ingenious for anybody to have thought it up. But he can say anything, and then when the media attacks him, that just reinforces his supporters because they say, "See that damn media? They're just going after Trump again." So he's got total immunity.
Yeah. I mean, and the media has so many flaws, and there's so many great reasons to criticize it, and it's not when it says there's no evidence that this happened, Mr. Trump. I mean, that's...
So isn't it, it's like the boy that cries wolf, right? The media has done so much bad stuff that now when we need them to be able to identify Trump for being the liar and bullshitter he is, people don't believe him. And it's like, why believe the kid? He's calling, once again, he's saying there's a wolf, but, for the last 10 times there was no wolf.
Well, and then it comes down to the fact that there's a lot of people in the world who their version of skepticism is to disbelieve everything the major media says and to believe everything that Alex Jones or equivalent says.
Yeah.
And to bring it back to immigration, I'm not going to say that I would support people who were anti-immigration for some other reason, but I mean, I'm particularly revolted because so many people make these arguments that are based quite literally on some fucking conservative meme from some, Facebook page that has a picture of 6 healthy-looking, swarthy fellows, and it says, "Where are all the women refugees? Why did look, they have cell phones." Just all of this garbage that, I mean. It's not even about, okay, the slight chance that a terrorist will sneak in or become radicalized later and we let them in. Nothing even remotely, okay, that is something to vaguely worry about. It's literally but they have cell phones, so they can't really be fleeing this war zone. I mean, the level of argument is frequently just appalling.
Yeah.
And it makes me assume that it's not good for a dialogue because it makes me assume that people are xenophobic and have no ability to suss out what a legitimate source is or anything like that if they're against these refugees. And I don't think everyone who's nervous is like that, but I'm getting a lot of that just brand of bullshit. So.
Yeah, you have Trump and others say, "Oh, what do you mean no refugees have become terrorists? What about the Tsarnaev brothers?"
Right.
Well, of course, the Tsarnaev brothers came over as kids, young kids, and their parents came in not under the refugee program actually, but under the asylum program, which is different. I think with the asylum program, you await your disposition in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You present yourself, at a border or at some entry point and say, "I'm asking for asylum." So the Tsarnaev boys became radicalized once they were here. So Trump uses that as proof we shouldn't let children in. And of course, Chris Christie has said he wouldn't let a 5-year-old orphan in or something like that.
That was
so hysterical.
Vile. Yeah.
So hysterical. And their proof is the Tsarnaevs.
Isn't that just convenient? I mean, God. I just... All right, I'm trying... I still am kind of amazed by how bad the Republicans have gotten on immigration in the last 20 years. Now, I think it's absurd. I saw a couple of articles where liberals were saying, George W. Bush actually wasn't this outwardly xenophobic and wasn't this committed to the rhetorical saying bad things about an entire religion. But it's absurd because George W. Bush has more, Muslim blood on his hands than most people you're likely to run into these days. So to say that, well, he was better because he didn't sound so mean about it, I think is basically a liberal parody. The point is how you talk, not whether you destroy entire country and entire region. But it is weird, though. It is weird that it's gotten worse than that. It's come to this point where these people are saying that you have to talk about who the enemy is, otherwise you can't beat him, and we're not being honest about it. And so it's all about the words that we use. And if we just say it right.
That's an interesting topic. I've been thinking about that, right? The Republicans really like to savage Obama for not saying the enemy is radical Islam, right? Is that that's the way they put it, right? He won't utter the words. Right. So I've been thinking, okay, what seems to be a reasonable way to approach that? And a couple of things occur to me. Number one, how often do you have to say the obvious? I mean, everybody knows that Al-Qaeda and then now the Islamic State claim that they represent Islam. That's not any kind of secret. So does nobody know that if Obama never says the enemy is radical Islam? Number two, and other people have said this, and it makes some sense, don't you in a way legitimate them by basically saying, yes, we believe you. You do represent a legitimate strain of well, maybe not the word legitimate maybe shouldn't be in there, but you do represent a real strain of Islam. Why do you want to concede that? There are plenty of Muslims who say that's absolutely not true, that the Quran doesn't support what they say you're allowed to do, kill innocents.
And that's a debate for religion class. It's a debate for people to have. It doesn't matter to me because all I know is that most people in the world don't want to become terrorists, and mostly, I mean, this idea that the people who don't know the difference between Sunni and Shia are just don't know much of anything, except maybe sampling a few choice Quran quotes out of a context that they don't, that they don't understand. They decide that they've got it all figured out about this religion that more than 1 billion people follow. I mean, to sum it up is absurd. And I don't care if it's, if ISIS was somehow really Islam and 1.5 billion other people was somehow pretend. It doesn't. The point is that these people are mostly probably decent, and we may disagree with them on some things, but most of them aren't ISIS, and we know this. And I don't know what Republicans are wanting Obama to say, except to concede. I mean,
I think it's a silly point. It's a political point just to hit him over the head with and make it seem like there's some grave flaw there. I think it might cash in on the whispers that Obama is secretly a Muslim. I'm pretty sure it relates to that. If you can't say that. That's been defined now as beyond the pale. If somebody asks you, is Obama a Christian, you basically can't even say, well, he says he's a Christian, so I believe him.
Right.
People are going to assume, you don't really believe him. So the new respectable way, I guess, in some circles at least, is to say Obama refuses to say that the enemy is radical Islamism, and I think that you're leaving the implication that's because he's secretly a Muslim, and so he's got some, even though he may not like that strain, he really can't bring himself to condemn them as. I just think it's stupid. Everybody knows these people claim to be Muslims. I mean, the other thing is, look, if the Republicans want to push this, then we got to push it all the way to Riyadh, because the home of Wahhabism is Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states, which are our good buddies in all this, that we give tons of military aid to, corrupt monarchs who practice Sharia law. Why isn't the right wing all crazy about that? And they are in a tacit alliance with Israel these days against Iran and Assad.
I mean, again, though, back to the W point is that very sensibly, immediately after 9/11, he said, like, let's not get crazy and act like, all the Muslims in the world are against us, like this, which, is a political thing to say, but it's a legitimate thing to say, as much as he did horrible things shortly afterwards. And they claim to love W because he was so tough and not like Obama, who's always bowing to various monarchs abroad and apologizing for the U.S. But, George W. Bush wasn't going around saying, making huge generalizations about an entire religion either, but somehow they think that he was swell. And Obama is suspect.
I recall him holding hands with a Saudi king.
But somehow it was manly when he did it and not submissive. Because
yeah, I mean, there are some right-wingers, I think, who are interested in this Saudi connection. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's these 27 missing pages, right, from, what is it, the Congressional 9/11 report, which is
something
about
like that,
the Saudis, and they won't release it. The Saudis were allowed to leave, including members of bin Laden's family, were allowed to leave. And I'm not being a truther here. Okay, I don't buy into that. I'm not saying they secretly, the regime was secretly involved in 9/11. That's what. But I think there was maybe embarrassing things that would have come out about the connection between the Bush administration and not just the Bush administration, because it goes back, beyond that. It's the permanent U.S. regime, which transcends any given president, and the relationship with Saudi Arabia. We know that that's an unsavory, long-lasting, deep relationship, which has not been good for lots of people in the Middle East or the American people, regular American people. But it's made a lot of money for other people who sell weapons to those kingdoms. I was reading about the United Arab Emirates today. Kerry was just over there. I don't know if you saw this. I put this on Facebook and also Twitter. Kerry was saying that the bombing in Yemen has been constructive, has been good. There's been progress. Does anybody pay attention to what they're doing in Yemen? What the U.S. is backing the Saudis and the UAE and
causing
Qatar
numerous civilian casualties.
They are destroying that place. It's the poorest place in the Middle East already. They import most of their food, like 80% or more of their food, and there's a starvation rate. And all this bombing. To get Al-Qaeda? No. To get the Islamic State, which is showing up there? No. No, to get the Houthis, who are kind of Shiite, although they're kind of an odd sect of Shiism that actually has something in common with Sunniism. It's a little confusing. And have gotten some help, but mild, from the Iranians. But they're not like Iranian proxies. They're not doing Iran's bidding in Yemen.
Right.
And that's who we're helping to destroy, and meanwhile helping to further the objectives of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen. I mean, it's unbelievable. There's Curry saying, with one of the sheiks saying that progress is being made. This is shameful, and no one's even no one's questioning the Obama. We heard Jim Acosta at a press conference with Obama the other day in Turkey saying, when are you going to get these bastards? The American people want to know when you're going to get these bastards. Remember that question?
I missed that.
So many people reacted to. You don't normally hear a reporter saying things like, the people want to know when are you going to get these bastards. No, why aren't they asking him about Yemen?
No one's paying
making that
attention to
more
Yemen.
possible.
Well, yeah. It's...
The U.S. is refueling Saudi planes in the air. We're the air traffic controllers. We're giving them intelligence. Yeah, it's unbelievable what they're doing. They're killing people, wholesale. Cluster bombs. You don't hear the right wing going after Obama. We so need a peace candidate.
Well, Obama is apparently the peace candidate. He's the wuss who apologizes for America. Just based on the fact that he's occasionally acknowledged that the U.S. has occasionally made mistakes, long before he came along, though, of course. And that's why, at the end of the day, I'm not going to say I'm going to pick the liberals or the Democrats over the Republicans, because there's so little difference, but just the idea that Obama has not killed enough people, and that's, the greatest problem with him is very disturbing.
Well, but so much of the blood from Syria is on his and Hillary Clinton's hands.
Oh, yeah.
Because they they turned that into a full-scale, not so much civil war because so many of the parties are from outside.
Yeah.
It's such a terrible conflict. It wouldn't have been as big as it is if it wasn't for them. And there were opportunities. As I was saying, I think on the Scott Horton show, as bad as Assad is, he's not as bad. He's not as bad as the American regime says he is. And I'm no fan of Assad's, but they make him to be much worse, just like they do with Putin.
Right. I mean, you can be very much not a fan of these people because, like, if we have any consistent ideological consistency, you and I are not fans of any leader, particularly one who can be described as a dictator. But that does not mean that everyone is the new Hitler, the way that, Saddam was during the first Gulf War, and again later until he was eliminated. And this sort of just as long everybody. That's the thing, though. Every person or every group is the worst ever until the new one is. And when that happens, you can ally with the worst person ever 5 minutes ago because now there's someone even worse. I mean,
yeah,
there's that's how it works. There's no memory for what happened in the past unless the past is 2001 or 1979. Those are the only dates that matter.
Right. And because someone is bad, it doesn't follow that every bad thing you can think up about that person must be true.
Right.
So
that's true.
Gaddafi was bad, but there was and today there still is no evidence that he intended to commit genocide in Benghazi, to go to Benghazi and wipe out every inhabitant. That's what was being said then. And at the time, there was a Boston editorial and others were showing that there was no foundation at all to that story. It's not just people looking back. It's people were saying it at the time. And yet the Hillary and Samantha Power and Susan Rice and her friends outside of the administration, like Sidney Blumenthal and this Anne-Marie Slaughter, or maybe she might have been inside, I'm not sure, Terrible Hawk, they were all pushing this story on Obama that he's going to commit, that Gaddafi's going to kill every man, woman, and child in Benghazi if he's not stopped. And that was totally made up to justify so-called humanitarian intervention, preemptive humanitarian intervention.
That's not a very
look at the
practical
consequences
thing
of that
for a dictator to do. I mean, that's another thing that Hawks won't acknowledge, is that even very nasty people have an agenda and have goals and have, they're aware of consequences. I mean, they're not gonna just. Iran is a good example. This idea that the entire country is suicidal and is therefore, ready and willing to nuke Israel. And simply because there are some theocrats mixed in there and some people we don't like very much, why does it follow that they want to risk their entire nation? I mean,
sure.
Why are
they tolerating? Why are they tolerating the Jews of Tehran practicing their religion freely? How many synagogues are in Riyadh? 0.
Yeah.
How many synagogues are in Tehran? It's like, I don't know, 25 or something, including plus kosher restaurant, Jewish hospital.
Yeah.
Which is it's a Jewish hospital, but it's not an exclusively Jewish hospital. In other words, it doesn't only take Jewish patients, but it is run by the Jewish community. They're not persecuted. Now, I'm not saying it's a free country, so they may pay a tax that maybe Muslims don't pay. I don't know, but the point is they're allowed to practice their religion.
As far as I looked up, they obviously can't be in a really high office, and they can't be judges because that's sort of the theocracy thing, I guess.
But they have a guaranteed seat in the parliament.
Yeah.
In the way that Lebanon has this confessional system, where each of the groups has. I'm not saying I endorse that, but has a certain number of seats apportioned to their share of the population. But they're not excluded. What it means is they're not excluded from the parliament, the Majlis, I think it's called, which is not a picture you would get. You'd think any country that had Ahmadinejad as the president at one time must have killed or driven any Jews out a long time ago. It's not true. It's an ancient community.
Right. it's just a bunch of people who it sounds. I still think that most people don't realize that they don't consider people in these other countries human beings, but for all the intents and purposes, they don't, because they don't understand that they're not just every theocracy or every foreign group or dictator. They're not in a suicide cult, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're not all just willing to get themselves nuked, because again, like Iran knows what would happen if, say, they went after Israel. Like they know, and they have no reason to want to do that because they know what would happen to them. It's
So
just
they
a
know
lack
about
of
Israel's, yeah. They know about
understanding.
Israel's arsenal, not even counting the U.S. Arsenal.
Right? Yeah.
So people are just hysterical when it comes to Muslims.
Yes.
And that's.
And
Getting back to this business about radical Islam, and a point that's been often made, and there's actually like a poster that people have put up on Facebook. When the Klan was active and hanging people or burning crosses and things like that, people weren't inclined to say that's radical Christianity. Those people in some way represent Christianity. People would have said, no, that's not true. They're weirdos who have just hijacked Christianity for a bad cause.
right.
But you can't say that about these guys.
I mean,
the Islamic State.
The Hawks
So
act like they have a degree in Islamic studies when, again, they don't even know the difference between. They don't know. They sure as hell don't know that the different groups that you do. Like you demonstrate your knowledge on every podcast. And they don't know anything. People who profess to want to take over a country know less about it than you do. It's actually extremely horrifying when I think about it.
Well, and they say things like that the Islamic State and Iran are really one, or they work together, or they're allies. And you can read that in like the Weekly Standard, I think.
Yeah. Well, the immigration thing also, though, is that the amazing thing is that you get maybe not quite like the level of hysterical demonization, but you get demonization with Mexicans, the big problem of the last several decades in terms of immigration. And you can have Catholics being terrified that Mexicans and Central Americans are going to come in and change something. These people are Catholics, and they're still demonizing them. There's no sanity to it. You can have a good talk about public dollars and the fact that it's practical that people speak English because it helps them out, if nothing else, things like that. But they never want to do that. They so frequently just fulfill our expectations about being xenophobic. And I don't want to sum up, assume that, but they fulfill those expectations like almost without fail.
Yeah, I saw somebody's comment today, I guess, on one of the social networks about the people who are so concerned with Muslims coming here ought to be welcoming the Mexicans.
Yes. And they don't, though. And oh dear. Sheldon, you've frozen. Sheldon has frozen. It's very upsetting.
Are we back?
Oh.
I think I froze. I think everything froze up for a minute. Might have been my computer.
You did freeze. I was mourning your passing right then.
Oh, well, you
I'm glad
froze
you're
too.
back.
Yeah, it's just I couldn't even move the cursor. Things just.
Oh, that's so good. I'm glad you're
So,
back.
do we have any viewers? I mean, I'm looking at the chat area here, and
well,
I've asked the question. Any questions? But I'm not seeing any activity.
Well, we've had up to 8 viewers, according to me, and I can see that because I'm the technical master, but maybe not in the chat.
I'm not seeing any activity in the chat.
I guess Justin Ramondo doesn't want to ask us baiting questions today. That's all right.
Did he show up?
Guess not.
I didn't understand his question. As long as you're mentioning Justin, I guess we can mention him.
No, I don't think we can.
Well, he wanted to know what country we'll go to when the terrorists attack Chicago, or the Syrians attack Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Why do I have to go to another country just because they attack Chicago?
I'm not sure.
Parisians aren't leaving Paris, much less they're not leaving France, much less Paris, or Paris, much less France. However that goes.
It's true. I wanted to raise more devil's advocate questions because I feel that's my job as the semi-moderator, but there was too much ranting.
We've been accused of a lack of diversity here.
Yes. We're like a college. We're like liberals in a college.
Okay, go ahead. Play devil's advocate in your last 4 minutes or so.
Yeah, well, we started 5 minutes late, so you could argue we have 9 minutes left if you wanted to both sides.
That's
I mean, I don't know. Oh, I'm shaking things. I don't know. I mean, do we have anything to worry about here, though? That's like, we haven't satisfied the people who don't think of themselves as xenophobic, but are still concerned about a sudden influx of people from abroad. And maybe most of them are fine and dandy and just want to be safe from the horrible war. But if the point, I guess, tends to come down to one really successful terrorist attack, even at a 9/11 level, much less, above that, that is a huge deal. And people like the aforementioned fellow Justin think that, that kind of attack is going to usher in some really scary domestic stuff. And in general, people are just afraid. They're afraid that all it takes is one attack, basically. We've been waiting since 9/11 for another large domestic attack in the United States, and there are people who were sure it would happen, and they think that all it takes is one person among all of these huddled masses.
Well, first I'll note the strange thing about, in order to prevent an attack domestically that would lead to a total crackdown by the government on our civil liberties, that we need to have a preemptive attack on our civil liberties to prevent that attack. So that's a little odd. Maybe I'll be accused of being glib there, but seems to be a problem there, right? Like I said, an open society can't guarantee safety. It's true. But it's not people coming in. Some days you watch CNN and the big danger is Al-Qaeda has a sleeper cell, or Al-Qaeda is going to send people here, or Islamic State going to send people here. But other days the bigger danger is the lone wolf who's not affiliated, because how can we track that person? He's not on the phone or the internet talking to the headquarters in wherever, Raqqa. Where's the headquarters? Raqqa. So which is the bigger danger now? The person who is affiliated and coordinating with the home group, totally not coordinating, totally a lone wolf, and just watching the news and saying, I'm mad, I'm going to do something. There's some risk from our interventionist foreign policy. That's what non-interventionists have been saying for decades and decades and decades. If there was no risk from it, half of our case was gone. It wasn't the entirety of our case, but it's part of it. So we can't be clean about it all along and then get to a point and say, oh, there's no reason to worry about that, because we've been saying all along there's a reason to worry about that. The question is, what do you do about it? And I think we have the state, as you and I have both acknowledged many times. We're not starting from scratch. The state is not going to be abolished at midnight. So now our question is not, okay, how is libertarian anarchism going to? I mean, that's it. I tried to address it in the piece I did on the refugees.
Mm-hmm.
But that was saying, okay, this is now for libertarians who want to know how would things work if there was no state. But there is a state, and there are police departments and police forces. Unfortunately, they do a lot of bad things. But as far as this kind of threat that you're referring to, we're going to have to rely on more traditional police work, detective work. I don't mean warrantless wiretapping of people or breaking and entering. I mean, the Fourth Amendment should be observed, and real decent old-fashioned police work in kind of the good sense that would exist in a free market, a real free market. I think will be equal to the task.
I mean, there's always.
Didn't it turn out in Paris they weren't using encryption? They weren't doing all these things that they try to scare us about. Yep. That you were about to say?
I was actually literally going to say that. Not encryption. They used. I don't know if I'm thinking that was Facebook chat, but even that sounds ridiculous. But they had like a "Yay, we're terrorists" like Facebook group, and they were using unencrypted chat things. I mean. And with 9/11, of course, there were so many warnings that got ignored. We always think that it's this dramatic cloak and dagger stuff, and the funny thing is that it's often something that you think someone could have noticed enough to actually stop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's almost as if there's a vested interest in stopping encryption.
Well, and there was talk the days after Paris, and this dropped out now, so maybe it didn't pan out, that these guys were talking to each other over a PlayStation 4. Yeah. Because if you're playing a game like, I don't know, World of Warcraft or something like that, you can be talking about real plots you have, but it looks like you're talking about the game. So they were... Now, this, like I said, faded away, so maybe nothing came of it. In fact, I heard someone express... on CNN, one of their terrorism experts expressed some skepticism about it. So sophisticated, getting with each other over PlayStation 4s.
14-year-olds do that. I mean, my God. That's who's mostly on there. It's a great
word, right? We're talking about plotting a bombing, but it looks like we're playing the game because you talk to other players and you do. I guess you engage in conspiracies against other, bad guys on these games. I don't play these games, so I don't understand. All I know about World of Warcraft I learned from South Park. There was a great episode about
that. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like a lot of the time this comes down to, like, I know it's easy to talk this big and everything gets scary. Like, it's scary, Paris makes everything scarier. Any success like this is... It's frightening. The way that a school shooting makes the reality of the accessibility of guns in America, you think, well, I mean, that's unfortunate that guns make it easier to kill people. There's no point in disputing that. Guns can be relatively easy to get. There's no point in disputing that. What you and I say is that, what do you do then? Throw a bunch of people in jail, take away their guns, make a list, like all these options. None of it's satisfying, but unfortunately, again, like with the war stuff, no one's going to be satisfied with you and I saying, well, we can't stop everything, Even in a literal police state, it's not like 1984. The party doesn't know everything. Even in a literal police state, this kind of attack could happen. That just doesn't satisfy people who are easily stoked into fearing poor huddled masses who were trying to escape from bombs. So
right, but a point related to what you just said, the same people who don't want to get hysterical when there's take away people's guns when there's a gun shooting are the same people who do want to get hysterical and violate liberty when there's the potential for or where there actually is terrorist activity, like in Paris, which is
absolutely
it's a nightmare. It's an obvious nightmare to go. You go to a cafe, you go to a concert, or you go to a soccer game, and you could get killed. Sure, right. It's a nightmare, and
as frightening as it was supposed to be.
But it's getting back to what we said. What's the best way to minimize the chance of that happening? First of all, don't go bombing foreign populations.
Yeah.
And backing corrupt, oppressive regimes. Don't get people mad at you.
Right.
We can just. I lost your picture. Are you there?
Yeah, I am here. That was weird.
You still there?
I am here.
Oh, yeah.
That was scary.
I'm seeing the white dove. I'm seeing the white dove.
Very fitting. And another thing I would say is, as usual caveat that of course it's horrible and no one deserved that in Paris, but France's sort of authoritarian secularism probably doesn't help
Yeah.
assimilate Muslim immigrant populations. You
Isn't
need
it
people
it's one of
to
the few
have
countries where a woman can wear the scarf in public, right? I
right.
believe
I mean,
Turkey
and
and France.
you don't have to be jazzed about the hijab or anything else to say that that's to outlaw it is going to ferment some dissatisfaction, and that seems pretty
Yeah.
obvious to me. But
And France has been highly interventionist in Syria and Mali. Might as well bring Mali into this because there's been stuff going on there, which is again another outgrowth of Libya, by the way. Arms have and fighters have flowed from Libya from Benghazi in particular to Mali. France has been highly interventionist. I mean, we tend to think, oh no, France is not, because remember when the congressman wanted to rename French fries freedom fries, wasn't that because France wasn't on board with us? Well, Sarkozy opposed the Iraq War in 2003, but things have changed with France. France has been was gung ho for getting into Libya. And don't forget, Syria and Lebanon are former colonies, basically, of France.
And
They've
France
never.
I mean, France was colonialist until all the stuff in the '60s that I'm not
Algeria.
gonna. Yeah, exactly.
And Algeria had a very bloody war of independence against France. A couple of people, Robert Fisk and Eric Margulies, have pointed out that when all the news media say that horrible Friday night in Paris was the worst violence in Paris since World War II, that's wrong. In 1961, there was a peaceful Algerian demonstration in Paris, and the regime slaughtered 200 people in suppressing that demonstration because there were Algerians living in
living in France.
Reading
about that, and it was
yeah.
What I saw was 70 to maybe up to 200. Nobody even knows how many people died. So it's certainly in the neighborhood of
Anti-War has a piece up there today. I think it's in the Spotlight by Eric Margulies on this. I didn't read it yet, but I read Robert Fisk's piece on that at the Counterpunch. So yeah, this kind of stuff doesn't get mentioned. It gets more mentioned on French TV. Over the weekend, when the bad things happened a week ago, I was watching. I didn't really even know I had access to it, but someone told me about it. French 24 TV, which is an English-French station. It's in France, based in Paris, with correspondents everywhere, but it's all English. So I was watching that, and it was a pleasure, for one thing, because compared to CNN, where everything's breaking news, it's more like the BBC. They're calm, they're not trying to whip you up with every story's bigger than the last one. But they would talk about French intervention in Syria and the rest of the Middle East. Americans aren't supposed to know. They wouldn't need to bother our stuff. So they don't tell us. They don't need to tell us this. We don't need to know. Besides, I guess it would sound like, well, those Parisians must have had it coming to them. They don't think we're mature enough to know. Well, no, it doesn't mean that, but we still like to know that the French have been bombing Syria.
I wonder if that's
like to know that, and
if that's what it is. Like, they don't think they can't handle the nuance, and they also don't think we can either. It's just not. It's not relevant somehow. I don't know. That's.
Yeah.
I'm not old enough to know quite why the news media is so faulty here, but.
Or it's just too complicated. It's too complicated for them.
I love that people, again, like you and I'm sorry for the lack of diversity in that statement, but like you and I, we're always pushed in the position of we're the ones who have to clarify every 5 minutes that we're not for terrorist attacks. Like obviously we're not. Like our byline pops up at antiwar.com, and and then people like Ron Paul are put in this same position. If you're somehow generally opposed to slaughtering people, you're the one who has to carefully clarify, but I'm not for that and that and that. It's just how you know that they're winning. The awful people and the awful ideas are winning, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, well, do you have any commercials for upcoming programs, or do you have something you're supposed to plug?
I absolutely do not have that in hand. Quick, while I try to find it, why don't you tell people to read your stuff?
Oh, yes. My stuff first appears at Free Association, which is sheldonrichman.com. That's my blog. But it's also picked up at the foreign policy stuff will also its way to anyword.com. All the stuff, domestic and foreign, will be on at Reason. Usually the stuff gets picked up at Counterpunch, so you can find me around. But the surest place is sheldonrichman.com, which is stuff from Lucy at anyword.com. Very fine company. Week in and week out.
Yes, that is a good place. I have finally had two Federalist pieces up. I think in the last week. There's one on prostitution and one on legalizing pot. Some very good libertarian standbys that we shouldn't get too casual about, and we gotta remind people that things should be legalized. And when I'm done off the air here, I have to finish a Vice thing I'm working on about tasers, and I hope I can get that in. Yeah. And for Liberty.me, there's a whole thing this week that there's just a lot of special things this week, so I feel like people should pop in a lot of cycle. It's like a week thing, and we have Tucker doing stuff and business stuff. Jacob Hornberger. I don't know. Just come back here and look at stuff this week. I can't. I'm not ready to sell the fine podcast, but it looks like there's a lot of good ones this week. So I would, pop into the old Liberty.me if you have the time.
I agree.
Sorry, Mike Reed.
At the risk of a lack of diversity, I agree with
that. Oh well, if colleges can do it, so can we. Agreeing is fun.
Okay, so we'll be back 2 weeks from tonight, no doubt talking about the Middle East.
And getting on angry tangents about Iran and war hawks as we do.
Or maybe something new will come up.
I hope not. News is never good.
All right, well, have a good fortnight.
You as well.
That's a good word. That's a good word we need to start using. We'll be back in a fortnight. I like that.
Yes. It was good to see you.
It's got some Victorian charm to it.
Always.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.